Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Holt-Shannon. I'm the director and co-founder of New Hampshire Listens. And I'm here with my colleagues, Kiata Moore-Vissing and Michaela Townsend. And we are thrilled to be launching our local civic health guide. New Hampshire Listens helps build capacity for strengthening democracy and community. We are based at the Carsey School of Public Policy at the University of New Hampshire. And we work with cities and towns and schools and nonprofits and coalitions, all focused on public life, all making sure people are involved in the decisions that impact them. So first, I want to share a huge, gymongous thank you to Laurel Lloyd and Bailey Schott. Laurel is our designer at Carsey and an editor. She always makes us look good, and we're thrilled with what she's done with our guide. And Bailey did all of our web design and video production, and just, shout out to Laurel and Bailey. I'm also grateful to Dr. Kiata Moore-Vissing, who was the real engine behind all of this work, Dr. Carrie Portree, Dr. Jess Carson, all of those who helped work on this guide. And just want to name Professor Emeritus Bruce Mallory, Dan Bromberg, Sarah Bogey, Carla Prescott, Steph McNally, and of course, Michaela. This work was supported by a grant from the UNH Office of Research, Economic Engagement and Outreach, and Maria Emanuel was our stand-up coach. So shout out to Maria. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us. We welcome you from inside the snowstorm in New Hampshire or from outside and around the globe. A civic health index is a statewide analysis of how strong or weak civic life is. And we've done a civic health index for New Hampshire for a number of years now. And our most recent civic health index came out in 2020. And a civic health index draws on census data. It helps us learn about voting and volunteering, civics education, how much people connect to each other and their neighbors. And we also added some extra measures around trust and how much people feel like they matter in their communities. As we were collecting all the civic health data, we realized that there was no way. That's my dog Pluto. I wondered if this might happen. He's very involved in his neighborhood. He has high civic health. We just wish he would calm down a little bit. When we were collecting the data for statewide civic health, we realized there's really no way to understand what's happening locally, because since the data, it applies to such a large swath, it's either statewide or large municipalities. And so it's hard to know, what's going on in Dover as compared to Manchester and all the many communities in the North Country. And so we know these civic experiences are different, and we wanted to be able to look at that. So we decided to create a guide to help local communities gather information about civic health so they can understand the strengths in their communities and also understand areas for improvement. We want everyday people, all kinds of folks in lots of different positions and connections to their community to be able to work together and get more information about civic health and also take action. So as we all are grappling with challenges of democracy at the national and global level, we believe strengthening community at the local level is really powerful and can make a difference. And so we hope that this guide is useful to you. Just a few practical considerations for today. This is really short. It's an intro. We just want to whet your appetite for this resource. Please add comments and questions in chat. Michaela's going to keep up with those and chime in and let us know some of what you're thinking. And also, we're going to share our email and some links for you in chat to some of the resources, and make sure that you know how to reach us. And we hope that you will reach out and that we get a chance to collaborate together. So I'm going to pass to Kiata.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And it's great to see everyone here today. I'm Kiata Moore-Vissing. I'm a fellow with New Hampshire Listens, and I'm also one of the authors of the guide. And to build on Michelle's points, as we look at national polarization happening in politics and across race and class, sometimes we can feel like this is an unsolvable problem. But if you concentrate on the local level, there's really a lot of progress that can be made. And we intend for this guide to help you examine civic dynamics at the local level. I wanted to say that we're aware today that we have people from New Hampshire present, and also people attending from around the United States and even from different countries, and we welcome you all. We designed this guide for a New Hampshire context, but many of the exercises and approaches are ones that you could use regardless of where you live. If you're from New Hampshire and you want to use parts of the guide at the local level, New Hampshire Listens is happy to explore ways that we can work together. And if you are from other states or countries but would like to adapt the guide for your local context, please reach out if we can be thought partners. This guide, it was designed for everyday people in local communities to collect information about local civic health and learn how to use it effectively. You don't have to have a research background in order to use this guide. There's a few activities where if you found someone who knew a little bit about research in your local community, it might be helpful, but it's certainly not required. And the good news is that regardless of where you are in your civic journey, there should be exercises that can help you. So if you're just starting out and just sort of starting to examine what's civic life like locally, there's exercises for you. And if you've done a lot of thinking about this, there's also exercises for you. So we hope it will serve a lot of different folks. And what I wanted to do to start is we actually created a short video about civic health. And so this is the video premiere of our little video. And I'll share it now just so you can take a look.
How do we foster a community where people are connected and where they trust and care about each other?
How do we build communities where people know they matter, where they show up at events, volunteer, stay informed, participate in important decisions, and vote?
We know the way our communities function is important. For instance, none of us enjoy going to a public meeting filled with yelling and angry disagreement. And if there is a community crisis, like damage from a bad storm or a tragedy, we want our neighbors to help each other so we can navigate the hard times.
In communities where people are isolated from each other and the public is polarized, we want to know, what are the things underneath these trends? What could be discouraging people from participating in local civic life? And most importantly, what can we do about it?
At the University of New Hampshire's Carsey School of Public Policy, we have been exploring how to collect important information about civic health for over a decade.
Civic health measures factors like how much people vote, stay informed about important issues, help neighbors, trust each other, volunteer, attend public meetings, and talk to people different from themselves.
We think this civic health information is helpful to support communities to thrive and for democracy to function effectively at the local level.
We often notice information in our communities about our schools, police, taxes, and the environment, but we don't always connect the dots to how this information connects to civic issues.
For instance, if we are experiencing high rates of students leaving school before they graduate high school, there may be other factors that explain this, including how much students feel they matter and how connected they feel to others in the community.
The Carsey School has collected information about civic health in New Hampshire since 2009. The most recent was issued in 2020. These indexes have allowed us to understand important trends in the state.
For instance, in the 2020 index, we learned that trust in local government has fallen, and that younger people in the state are not engaging in their communities as much as other generations. These insights help us then address civic issues in the state. However, one frustration we had is that the state data doesn't allow for us to look at the civic experiences of different communities in the state.
And we think this is really important.
So we have designed a guide for communities to collect information about civic health at the local level.
To learn more, please check out the next video.
I hope that you enjoyed that video. We created that because we feel like sometimes civic health is difficult to explain. And we wanted a video that if you were doing this work in your local communities, that you could show it to other people to just have kind of an explainer of what civic health is and why it's important. So that's available on the website. What I wanted to do is walk you through some highlights of the guide a bit, just to familiarize yourself a little bit with it. And if you have questions as I'm sharing, you're very welcome to share those questions in the chat. As Michelle mentioned, this is a quick hit, so we won't have a lot of time for conversation today, but hopefully it's a little teaser and spark some interest. So I want to show you. So this is the guide overview, kind of like an annotated table of contents. And basically, in the first section of the guide, we define civic health. So we also created the video that you just saw to provide an introduction to the public about what civic health is. But we have some sections that share some different language and examples of what civic health is. In the second section, we walk you through how to make a plan of action of how you want to approach civic health at the local level, because there's lots of things that you could do to measure civic health or talk about civic health, and we have multiple options in the guide. So this section is really to help you make a strategy and think that through. And the section raises some important questions like, what do you want to know about civic health, and who in your community do you want to hear from? In the third section, we share some exercises and questions to consider how to build equity into your process, thinking through all the people who live in your community, including those who may not feel welcome or respected in civic processes. And then the fourth section is really the heart of the guide. So we provide a lot of different tools about how local people can collect information about local civic health. We share resources around how to develop your own local survey and provide a bank of survey questions you can draw from. We also share some examples if you wanted to conduct some interviews or even focus groups at the local level to talk about civic health. This section shares a sample guide about how to conduct a community dialogue on the status of local civic health. And we also share some examples of how to use a citizen journalism technique called photo voice to explore civic health. So once you've, let me just scroll down here. Once you've gathered some information about civic health, the next steps are to make sense of the data through by analyzing it, and to share the results of what you've learned to the public. So sections 5 and 6 help you to learn how to analyze and share information in effective and accessible ways. And then in section 7, we discuss how to sustain civic health work at the local level over time. For instance, one of our suggestions is to create celebratory events annually that publicize and reward civic work in the community. And as one example, one of our local high schools actually invites students the day that they turn 18 to the main office to register to vote. So that's just an example of embedding civic health into your culture and emphasizing the importance of voting. And then lastly, we have an appendix where we pull out trends from the 2020 New Hampshire Civic Health Index. So if you're a New Hampshire resident, you could use this appendix for local conversations and explore if trends at the state level ring true for you at the local level. For instance, one of our big findings in 2020 was that people's trust in their government fell. So the question would be, is this true for you at the local level? It's certainly worth finding out and making some comparisons. We've dedicated a whole webpage for this guide, and I will show you the webpage in just a moment, so you can. But in addition to the video that you saw a few minutes ago, we also have a video that's essentially what I'm doing now. It walks people through the guide itself, so that you don't have to take that on yourself of explaining what's in this guide. You can actually just show a video of essentially of me talking and explaining it, if that makes things a little easier for you. It's also a nice reminder if you just want a quick check of like what's in this guide and you don't want to sit and read, the whole guide because it is quite long. And the other thing that we wanted to show you is at the bottom here, there's the full guide. So you could download this as a PDF. But basically, we created these different sections of the guide that are just PDFs of each section of the guide. So if you wanted to just, like, let's say you wanted to just do an exercise around equity, you could just download and print or download and email this guide, this part of the guide, and you wouldn't have to have people scrolling through the whole long PDF. So this is just ways that we try to make things a little bit more accessible for you. At the bottom of this, you can see there's also a link to the 2020 Civic Health Index, which is a different webpage if you want to learn about the work that we did in New Hampshire in 2020 for the Civic Health Index. So I wanted to just show you a couple of exercises. So I'm going to share again to a new screen. So I'm just going to scroll down. So we actually have a couple different exercises around stakeholder mapping. So something that we have found as community engagement practitioners at New Hampshire Listens is that oftentimes it's difficult for communities to understand, like, how do we broaden past the sorry for all the scrolling here, and here we are. This is the only time we'll do this, but there's often challenges around like how do we get past the usual suspects who always show up at our meetings and reach a more diverse population of the public and hear different voices. So I wanted to show you an exercise we designed to get at that, which is in the guide. So you can see here with this first flower, part of the idea is that you know, as you're thinking about doing a civic health exercise or really any civic engagement exercise, one of the first steps is thinking like who are all the different groups that we want represented in the room or in this process. And so you can see here, for instance, if we were thinking about doing some local civic health work, we brainstormed, we'd want local businesses to participate, youth groups, town leaders, underrepresented people, which could mean BIPOC populations, low-income populations, people with disabilities. In some contexts, this could also mean youth, people experiencing homelessness. So you can see here, we identified different petals for this primary flower. And then what we actually did is took one of the flower petals and then made it the center of a secondary flower. And so here in this example, we did town leaders. And so then we started to brainstorm who are all the different groups of town leaders. And so we had our city manager, you know, emergency responders in the fire department, local government, school superintendent. And then the next step would be to actually then think about who do we know who works in these organizations? Or if we don't know anyone who works in those organizations, do we know someone who knows someone, essentially? So an example here would be, you know, maybe Chief Brown is the director of the fire department. So, you know that you could talk with him about fire issues. And maybe you don't know the city manager, but you know Kara, and you know that Kara knows the city manager. And so you have a connection where you can access the city manager. And then the idea is that once you've completed this flower, you would go on to one of your other petals from the primary flower and do it all again and keep going until you've grown your garden. So we think this is a great way to just do some community mapping and really think intentionally about who's in your community and who are all the people who are having civic experiences, and are they having different civic experiences, based on some of their other like demographic populations and things like that. And then I wanted to show a linked activity that we have, which is doing a civic tour. And the idea is to actually assemble like a diverse group of people from your community to walk through public spaces together and evaluate how they either facilitate or may pose barriers to healthy civic life. So you can see here some of the questions that we have. If someone was to go to like a community center or the public library or a public park, you could think about, how does this place encourage connection in our community? How does this place discourage connection in our community? Does the place encourage people from different backgrounds to come together? Could it be more welcoming? Is the place accessible to all people in the community? Are there barriers for some groups? So these are just a couple examples of exercises, and I wanted to show you a couple more. Just give me one moment to toggle to the next screen. Okay. So we also created a survey bank, and the reason we did this is some of you may be aware that it's actually kind of complicated to develop a good survey. And sometimes a good way to develop a survey is using survey measures that have been tested in other surveys, maybe that researchers have developed that you can pull into your local work. And the nice thing about some of these survey items is in New Hampshire, some of these are data that is being measured in New Hampshire, so you may even be able to do some state comparisons on some of these survey items. But we put together a survey bank just to help people out in developing a survey. And so just to show you this a little bit, like here, if you wanted to know something about voting, like why aren't more people showing up to vote? There's some questions you could ask around voter registration. If you wanted to know, how are people engaging with the community? You could ask questions like, do people know how to become involved and participate in problem solving in their community? Do people feel like they matter to other people in their community? And then we have some questions around political engagement, like have people signed a petition? Have they ever gone to a protest? Are they interested in politics and national affairs? How do people feel about living in their community? I think this question is quite powerful. Would you move away from this neighborhood if you could? And then lastly, we have some questions about community leadership and about trust, which I think we mentioned earlier. So questions around, do you trust your government, national and local? Do you trust other people in your neighborhood? So that's another resource in the guide. And then just to show one more, as I mentioned earlier, we also created a dialogue guide. Oops, this is the wrong one. Sorry. All these links kind of look alike. So we also created a dialogue guide if people wanted to have just a conversation about, the state of local civic health and some of the dynamics that were going on in their community. And this is just a little excerpt from the guide. You could look at the whole discussion guide, but we essentially created a discussion guide for a community dialogue that you could edit, or draw questions from. As some of you may know, this is really one of New Hampshire Listens specialties is community dialogue. And so here, just as some sample questions, we start with some questions around understanding our experiences, ourselves and each other. So the first question, I'll just sub in a community name here, but describe an event that has helped shape your experience living in Dover, something that made you feel like Dover is your community or your home. Another question is from your experience, in what ways has civic health, community engagement, or a sense of community changed in the past 10 years ago? Are there areas where you'd like to have a voice but don't feel like it's accessible? And then there's some general questions for the group that you could explore together as a collective, like what does community feel like to you? Do you feel connected to your community? What barriers do you experience to feeling a sense of community? Do you feel aware of when community decisions are being made? How do you find this information? Do you feel that you are able to participate or have a say in these community decisions if you'd like to? So I could obviously go on and on, but given the time, I think, that was really our brief highlights of the guide. But I did just want to pause. I know there's some things going on in the chat, and Michaela, I wanted to ask you, are there any questions or comments that you wanted to sort of highlight from the chat? We may not be able to address them all right now.
And I want to.
Oh, Michelle, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Michelle has been answering some questions in the chat, Michelle. So if you have any reflections on what you've shared. Somebody, I believe, Reb, I don't know, my chat got deleted, but I believe Reb was asking if the 2020 data for the Civic Health Index might have been skewed because of COVID.
So that's a great question. Actually, the data that we used for the 2020 index was taken before COVID. So we actually don't currently have a post-pandemic assessment of civic health in New Hampshire. I think we are definitely hoping to do that in the coming years. But yeah, I think the data will change. I mean, we certainly know the pandemic has affected all of our lives.
Some of the other pieces that I saw in chat were about just how people are reaching folks, and someone posted about just like what are the ways that people reach each other, and that just is sort of a shifting landscape in a lot of ways because of social media and fewer newspapers, but we do think that this kind of effort, it helps with the long game of reaching folks who haven't been kind of go to meeting people, or for whatever reason don't feel like they're a part of the decisions in their communities. And then you can sort of make connections when you have that sort of effort. Like part of this work and the exercises in this guide would build some of those connections, and then whether it's Facebook or email lists or newsletters from your town or whatever the many things are, that would be helpful. And I also I see lots of good chat about equity and equality and engagement, and that this whole guide is really about acknowledging that people need help in their communities, making sure that everyone who is in that community feels like they are a part of things, feels like they have access to influence decisions, feel informed, feel like they matter. And so that's certainly fundamental to the use of this guide. All right.
All right. Do we have time for one other question?
Yeah.
Question
Michaela.
from Connie, who's asking, in larger cities, how do you suggest handling a survey to keep it manageable, but landing on good data?
I'll let Kiara take that one. There's some more in the guide, but yeah.
I'm just reading it. How do you? Yeah, so I think there are a couple, I saw your follow-up question as well, Connie. So I think there are a couple of things you could do. So one is you could decide to just focus on certain neighborhoods in a larger city. Like if you're, let's say that you want to hear the voices of you know, an immigrant community or a lower income community within a particular city, you know, you could try to design your survey around that. The other thing that you could do is try to, you know, do more of like a representative sample of a city. That is a bit more complex with surveys. And if you wanted to go in that direction, I would suggest talking with Jess Carson at the Carsey School, who's one of our survey experts. She actually designed the survey section of the guide. Yeah, there's essentially ways that you can weight a survey to make sure that you're like representing the full city and community, even if you don't survey everyone in the community.
Great. And I'll address some of those last questions and about working with us. So one of the questions was, do you need to isolate on a particular geographical area? And that's exactly what this is for. If you're looking at a state or a larger municipality, the Civic Health Index with the census data can be really informative. This is for those smaller places. It can be a town. It can be it can even be a county. And the tools in this guide can help, you know, you pull together lots of people and information in order to figure out, or where do we want to focus? So it's not like you have to do everything. You know, you might do a little bit of outreach and learn that young people in your community aren't voting as much, or people don't feel connected as they get older. They feel more isolated, and then that tells you, okay, we're gonna focus on youth. We're gonna focus on older adults, or we're gonna focus on, you know, places in our community where people can interact with folks that they might not see as often. So when you're using this guide, you can, you know, map a population in your community. You can do civic tours, come up with a strategy for understanding civic health, ways to collect information, host dialogues, and share those learnings with your community and with people, so that, again, ultimately you can make an impact in improving the civic health in your community. And also identifying threats. There's some comments in the chat about the divisiveness that we're experiencing. You know, most of us in our communities, that a lot has been researched and talked about the political divisions. There's also been a lot of research about it being not as bad as we think. So I think focusing locally can also be a place of hope, and it can be a place where people's ties are strong and where you can have an impact. The last thing I'll share is just that in terms of working with us, reach out. We'd love to talk with you. Does it cost something? It does cost something in the sense of, like, what's going to support your work. We would love to work with you. There are grants and funders that we hope to work with to fund some of this work. And then there's also just ways to piece small parts together so you can get started without having done, you know, and feeling like you've got to do a big fundraising. we can help you lift off the work, think about the different components, and compare your data to state findings. And we're happy to talk to you even if you are outside of New Hampshire and consider how this can be a part of your local context. We are always happy to be a thought partner. And we'll see if there's other questions, but we are at the end of our time. And just grateful that you all were here. Again, we have contact information in the chat and some links there, which we'll leave up for a few minutes, knowing as folks kind of jump off and head to other things. If you're in New Hampshire, you've probably got some shoveling to do. But thank you for joining us. Thank you, Kiata and Michaela, for taking us through this quick whoosh on this, really this guide that we're very proud of. So reach out if we can help. Thank you all.